Good evening, and welcome to the Sleeping Zoo. Facts to fall asleep to. We turn to the monumental, thick-skinned titans that define the African savanna. The two extant rhinoceros species, the Black Rhinoceros, Diceros bicornis, and the White Rhinoceros, Ceratotherium simum. These magnificent beasts are the heavy armor of the Perissodactyla order. The non-ruminant, odd-toed ungulates, representing one of the deepest evolutionary splits within the great African megafauna, a living dichotomy defined by their mouths, their attitudes, and their utterly contrasting fates in the Anthropocene. To approach them is to approach the primal power of the Cenozoic, creatures whose mere existence is a triumph of persistence, yet whose immediate future hinges entirely on the desperate global war waged to protect their crowning glory, the horn, the very substance that has made them the most valuable targets on the planet. Our assessment must begin with a rigorous analysis of the taxonomic and historical dichotomy, understanding that their common names conceal their true biological divergence. The Black Rhinoceros, Diceros bicornis, is not in fact black, nor is the White Rhinoceros, Ceratotherium simum, truly white. Both species range in color from slate gray to yellowish brown, their precise hue determined by the mud in which they wallow, their coloring a direct function of the local soil composition, which acts as a protective mineral coating. Yet the names perpetuate a crucial and ancient misunderstanding. The term white is a linguistic corruption, likely derived from the Afrikaans word wide or white, meaning wide, a descriptor referring not to the animal's color, but specifically to its broad, square muzzle, perfectly adapted for bulk grazing on grass. When English-speaking settlers mistakenly interpreted whitey as white, the descriptor was applied, and by default, the other, narrow-mouthed species became known as the Black Rhino, despite its similar coloration, and shared ancestry with the other species. This linguistic accident masks the critical ecological separation that governs their lives. Both species are descendants of a lineage that split millions of years ago, with the Black Rhino belonging to the genus Diceros, meaning two-horned, and representing the browser archetype, a creature of dense bush and scrub that thrives on high-quality, fragmented forage. Conversely, the White Rhino belongs to the genus Ceratotherium, meaning horned beast, and represents the grazer archetype, a creature of open grassland and savanna that subsists on low-quality, high-volume bulk forage. This fundamental difference in diet is the evolutionary linchpin that determines their morphology, their social structure, and their temperament. Within this split, the Black Rhino is itself highly fragmented, containing 3 surviving subspecies. The south-central Black Rhino, Diceros bicornis minor, the eastern Black Rhino, Diceros bicornis mecali, and the southwestern Black Rhino, Diceros bicornis, all of which are listed as critically endangered or vulnerable, clinging to existence in isolated, intensively managed populations. The plight of the western Black Rhino Diceros bicornis longipes, declared extinct in 2011, serves as a grim warning of the irreversible losses already incurred. The White Rhino is divided into 2. The relatively successful southern White Rhino, Ceratotherium simum, which has rebounded from near extinction due to the success of South African conservation efforts in the 20th century, and the tragic northern White Rhino Ceratotherium, simum cottoni, which, with only 2 females remaining, stands on the very precipice of functional extinction, representing one of the most immediate and profound conservation emergencies in history. The fate of these subspecies reflects the intense pressure of human encroachment and the specific, localized effects of the poaching epidemic that peaked dramatically in the early 2010s, decimating populations across their historic ranges due to a confluence of political instability and rising Asian demand for the horn. We proceed to a meticulous morphological and anatomical dissection, where the animal's forms are revealed as perfect functional extensions of their dietary mandates, a comparison that highlights the stark differences between the precise, selective feeder and the bulk, unselective cropping machine. The most immediate and functionally critical difference is the lip structure, a simple feature that represents millions of years of divergent evolution. The black rhinoceros, the browser, possesses a prehensile, pointed or hooked upper lip, a structure of phenomenal muscular dexterity controlled by an extensive network of facial nerves that acts like a precision digit. This specialized lip is used to grasp, tear, and strip leaves, shoots, fruits, and small branches from thorny bushes, and scrub with exacting selectivity, allowing the animal to avoid highly lignified or toxic plant parts and maximize nutrient uptake from high-quality forage with minimal energetic waste. This feeding strategy requires the black rhino's head to be carried relatively high off the ground, an orientation that facilitates reaching higher shrubs and branches, necessitating a strong, more upright neck and associated natural musculature concentrated high on the back. Conversely, the white rhino, the grazer, exhibits the eponymous wide, square muzzle that gave it its name, a flat, non-prehensile structure that functions like a powerful, horizontally oriented sickle or lawnmower blade. This wide lip is optimized for bulk cropping large swathes of short, low-lying grasses close to the ground, allowing for rapid, non-selective consumption of low-quality, high-fiber forage. Correspondingly, the white rhino carries its massive, elongate skull low to the ground, often with the muzzle barely a hand's width above the surface, a posture that requires a pronounced nutshell hump, a massive muscular attachment over the shoulders that counterbalances the immense weight of the head and allows for the sustained, powerful side-to-side sweeping motion necessary for efficient grazing over long periods. This difference in head carriage and lip specialization dictates their internal digestive apparatus. Both are hindgut fermenters, using symbiotic gut bacteria to break down cellulose in the large intestine and cecum, but the white rhino processes far higher volumes of lower quality, high silica roughage, leading to distinct differences in dental wear patterns. Beyond the mouth, the sheer scale and mass of the two species presents a formidable contrast. The white rhinoceros is significantly the larger and heavier of the two, often reaching weights of up to 3,600 kilograms and a length of over 4 meters, with a shoulder height approaching 185 centimeters, making it the second largest land mammal after the African elephant. A truly colossal creature, a terrestrial battleship of immense gravitational presence. The black rhinoceros, while still enormous and immensely powerful, is significantly smaller and less massive, averaging between 800 and 1,400 kilograms, with exceptional specimens reaching 1,800 kilograms. The black rhinoceros also has a notably concave back profile compared to the white rhino's more straight or slightly convex dorsal line. This difference in mass dictates their agility and the nature of their movements. The smaller black rhino is famed for its rapid, unpredictable, and highly aggressive agility in dense bush, capable of sudden changes in direction and rapid acceleration to speeds of up to 55 kilometers per hour, despite its size, relying on short bursts of speed and maneuverability. In contrast, the white rhino, particularly the dominant males, moves with a more deliberate, imposing, and less erratic gait, relying on its sheer bulk and intimidation. Both species possess the defining characteristic of the family, the two horns, which are composed entirely of compacted keratin. The same fibrous protein found in human hair and fingernails, a fibrous composite matrix of immense tensile strength, contrary to the persistent myth that they contain bone. The forward horn, or anterior horn, is typically longer, sometimes exceeding 150 centimeters, and is used extensively for defense, pushing through dense vegetation, foraging, digging for water or roots, and ritualized sparring during territorial and mating disputes. The second horn, positioned behind the first, is usually shorter and less tapered. The dermal layer of both species is immensely thick, often reaching 5 centimeters in places, composed of a dense matrix of collagen fibers and elastin, providing extraordinary protection against the scratches and gouges from dense thorn scrub, minor injuries during intraspecific combat, and the bites of competing animals. This dermal shield, however, is a porous structure, and the animals require regular wallowing in mud, not just for thermoregulation, as they lack sufficient eccrine sweat glands to effectively dissipate heat through evaporation, but also to coat the skin in a protective layer of clay and silt that acts as a physical barrier against ticks, parasitic insects like biting flies, and the damaging effects of solar ultraviolet radiation, a critical, non-negotiable maintenance behavior for both species that also aids in wound healing. The differences in their size and musculature are a clear reflection of the trade-off between the need for high-mass intimidation and communal defense in open grasslands, and the need for explosive maneuverability and highly protective camouflage in restricted brush. The dichotomy extends deeply into their behavioral and ecological profiles, where their feeding habits impose completely different social mandates, dictating whether they can afford to be clustered or must be dispersed. The white rhinoceros is the more gregarious and social of the two species, a necessity driven by its feeding ecology on open plains, where grass is abundant but visibility is high, making large, organized groups essential for mutual defense against predators, particularly lion prides and hyenas, which often target vulnerable calves. They live in social units known as crashes, typically composed of a dominant territorial bull, several cows, and their offspring, with a particularly strong and prolonged maternal bond, where the calf will stay with the mother for up to 3 years, sometimes even after the birth of a new sibling, exhibiting a degree of neoteny, where the protective parental investment is extended. The dominant male maintains his territory through a meticulous system of boundary marking that relies on highly visible dung middens, communal dung piles that can accumulate to enormous sizes over many years, and foot scraping, a behavior where the bull rubs the soles of his feet in the dung, utilizing specialized interdigital scent glands, and then disperses the material by scuffing the ground with his hind feet. Ensuring the complex scent is widely distributed and carried by the wind, communicating his presence, social rank, and hormonal status to rivals. Their temperament is generally considered more placid and less aggressive toward humans than their black cousins, a characteristic likely due to their social nature and their tendency to flee or investigate a threat from a distance rather than immediately charge, a behavior consistent with open country animals. Their communication is complex, involving a range of snorts, grunts, bellows, and rapid panting calls used during chases, with sophisticated body language that includes head tilting, horn lowering, and the display of submission postures, such as flattening the ears. This social structure allows for communal defense, shared vigilance, and the efficient transfer of critical survival knowledge within the crash, a clear adaptation to the dangers of the open savanna. The black rhinoceros, conversely, is the quintessential solitary giant of the herbivore world, a highly secretive and non-social creature whose ecology demands dispersal. Living in dense bush, where high-quality browse food is patchy and visibility is minimal, aggression and individual awareness are the primary survival tools. Black rhino are largely solitary outside of the breeding season or the mother-calf unit, which is much shorter and less tolerant of older offspring than in the white rhino, with calves typically dispersing much earlier. Their territorial marking is equally focused on dung middens, but these are typically smaller, more widely dispersed, and heavily incorporated into the complex network of tunnels and paths the rhino establishes within the bush, creating a labyrinth of scent-mark trails. The black rhino is famed for its notoriously bad temper and highly unpredictable behavior, often charging perceived threats with an aggressive, rapid, and erratic speed, seemingly investigating first and attacking second, a critical defense mechanism essential for a smaller solitary animal operating in dense cover, where a close encounter is a high risk, and a quick, decisive action is necessary for survival. This highly aggressive disposition, combined with their ability to maneuver rapidly through thick brush, makes them significantly more dangerous to approach or study in the wild. Their sensory perception is critical to their survival, while their sight is notoriously poor, a consequence of operating primarily in dark, dense bush and relying instead on chemical and acoustic cues. Their hearing and sense of smell are exceptional. They use their large, independently rotating ears, powered by complex auricular muscles, to precisely locate sounds across a wide frequency range, and their highly developed vomeronasal organ, activated via the Fleeman response, a characteristic lip-curling action, allows them to draw in air and analyze complex airborne pheromones and chemical signals left by rivals or receptive females in great detail, providing a continuous unseen map of the ecological and social dynamics within their territory, a form of chemosensory communication that is vital for locating scarce mates. The differences are profound. The white rhino is a sentinel of the plain, relying on cooperation and bulk. The black rhino is a ghost of the thicket, relying on individual ferocity, dispersal, and stealth. The continued existence of both species is now entirely framed by the crisis of the Anthropocene and the poaching war, a catastrophic engagement driven by the irrational valuation of their horns. The historical decline of both species in the 19th and 20th centuries was primarily driven by colonial hunting and habitat loss due to agricultural expansion. But the current crisis is a hyper-accelerated, industrialized form of organized crime, driven by demand for a non-medicinal substance. The black rhinoceros, once the most numerous rhino species in Africa, with an estimated population of 65,000 individuals in 1970, suffered a devastating, politically driven slaughter that reduced its numbers by 96% in just 2 decades, fueled by political instability, easy access to military weapons, and the catastrophic rise in horn prices. The white rhinoceros faced a similar, though less absolute, collapse. The northern white rhino subspecies was already decimated by the 1980s due to civil conflict and unchecked poaching, and the southern white rhino, though saved by early conservation intervention, still faced intense, constant pressure. The current war is fueled by continuous demand in Asia, particularly Vietnam and China, where the horn is sought despite its lack of proven medicinal value. In fact, it possesses nothing beyond that of a simple protein and is clinically inert, but as a highly desirable status symbol, a traditional medicine ingredient believed, without scientific basis, to cure everything from fever to cancer, and as a material for ceremonial carvings and investment. The poaching apparatus is a highly organized, professional, and technologically sophisticated network, a militarized threat far beyond the capability of traditional game rangers. Poaching gangs, often operating with military-grade precision and equipment, including silenced high-caliber rifles, veterinary-grade dart guns, GPS tracking, encrypted satellite communications, night vision goggles, and occasionally surveillance drones and helicopters, target the animals with extreme efficiency, utilizing knowledge of rhino paths and watering holes. The typical method involves tranquilizing the rhino with powerful veterinary drugs like atropine, and then brutally hacking the horn off with axes or chainsaws, while the animal is still anesthetized or barely conscious, maximizing the yield while leaving the massive carcass to bleed out and die slowly from shock and subsequent sepsis. A scene of immense, calculated, and pointless cruelty. The logistics of the criminal syndicates are formidable, involving cross-border smuggling routes, complex money laundering operations, and often the complicity or corruption of local officials and law enforcement, turning conservation into a national security issue. The complexity of this threat has forced conservationists into an impossible, costly war of attrition, requiring radical and ethically challenging countermeasures, shifting the focus from passive protection to active combat and technological surveillance. One of the most profound conservation responses is the practice of dehorning, where rhinos are anesthetized using heavy narcotics, and their horns are proactively trimmed down to a short stub using specialized saws and grinders, a procedure that causes the animal no pain as the horn is avascular and lacks nerve endings, analogous to cutting a human fingernail. The intent is to remove the financial incentive, making the rhino valueless to the poacher, thereby deterring the kill. This measure, however, is a Faustian bargain, as it requires immense, continuous investment for repeated procedures. The horn regrows at a rate of 8 centimeters per year, necessitating dehorning every 24 months, and potentially reduces the rhino's ability to defend its calf or itself, forcing conservationists to choose between the animal's natural defense and its immediate survival. Furthermore, the practice of intensive protection zones, IPEPS, has become standard, turning selected national parks into veritable fortresses defended by anti-poaching units, highly trained, often former military personnel, who utilize advanced technologies like thermal imaging drones, seismic and acoustic ground sensors, microchipped horns for tracking, and high-level intelligence networks. This effort is a continuous high-risk engagement where rangers face heavily armed, ruthless criminals, a desperate holding action aimed at suppressing the poaching rate below the natural population birth rate to ensure at least demographic stability. The fate of the northern white rhinoceros, Ceratotherium simum cotoni, stands as the starkest evidence of this failure, a subspecies driven to functional extinction by the perfect storm of poaching and civil war in its historic range across Uganda, Sudan, Chad, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The last male, Sudan, died in 2018 at the Old Pejeta Conservancy in Kenya, leaving only 2 surviving females, Narration and Fatu, both incapable of natural reproduction due to age-related degeneration and uterine issues, a heartbreaking scenario where the genetic library is effectively closed. The last hope for this subspecies now rests entirely on cutting-edge genetic rescue technologies, a science fiction solution to a real-world catastrophe. This multinational effort, involving labs and conservancies globally, involves the harvest of viable egg cells from the 2 remaining females and the use of frozen, long-stored sperm harvested from deceased males, utilizing specialized intracytoplasmic sperm injection, ISI within in vitro fertilization to create viable embryos. These precious embryos must then be implanted into surrogate southern white rhino females, the closest genetic relative, to carry the pregnancy to term, a demanding, risky, and highly expensive process that may take decades and relies on continuous intensive scientific innovation to overcome the complexities of rhino reproduction. Even more futuristic is the research into induced pluripotent stem cell technology, aiming to create functional gamete sperm and eggs from stored somatic non-reproductive tissue samples of the northern white rhino, a last-ditch effort to resurrect the genetic diversity lost by human action and restore a functional reproducing population. Despite the pervasive nature of the crisis, the comparison between the 2 species also yields a paradoxical success story and a continued struggle. The southern white rhino, Ceratotherium, simum, represents one of the great conservation triumphs, having been reduced to as few as 50 individuals in South Africa's Umfolozi Game Reserve at the turn of the 20th century due to relentless hunting. Through stringent protection, diligent management, and successful translocation programs, the risky yet necessary movement of rhinos to new, secure habitats to expand the gene pool and hedge against localized threats. The southern white rhino population has rebounded dramatically, exceeding 20,000 individuals. This recovery, however, is exceptionally fragile, as the sheer numbers and their predictable open country behavior make them a primary target, bearing the overwhelming brunt of the recent poaching wave, accounting for over 90% of all rhino poaching incidents globally. Conversely, the black rhinoceros, which is inherently less social, more aggressive, and thrives in dense bush that makes counting, monitoring, and patrolling exponentially harder, remains critically endangered. Its global population currently hovers around 6,500 individuals globally, a precarious number that still requires continuous, intensive, and high-cost management. The inherent behavioral differences that made the Black Rhino the superior survivor in the thicket, its solitary nature and extreme aggression, have now become liabilities in the face of organized human threats, as solitary animals are harder to monitor and protect than gregarious crashes, often disappearing into the vastness of the bush. Therefore, the recovery of the Black Rhino is slower, more fragmented, and requires much higher levels of direct intervention per animal, including the use of state-of-the-art radio telemetry and acoustic monitoring systems to locate and track every single individual. In African folklore, the two species possess distinct personalities derived from their behavior. The Black Rhino, a browser with a hooked lip, is the more solitary and aggressive of the two. It is the subject of the enduring fire-eater myth. Legends among various southern African cultures tell of the Black Rhino charging into campfires to stomp them out. While likely born from the animal's reactivity to scent and threats, this myth cemented its reputation as a volatile elemental force of nature, a creature so fearless it would fight fire itself. The White Rhino, a grazer with a wide, square lip, carries a folklore rooted in language. In Zulu culture, the White Rhino is known as Ubejana, or the determined one, symbolizing steadfastness and territorial immovability rather than the erratic aggression of its cousin. In modern media, these distinctions often blur, yet specific archetypes remain. The rhinoceros is frequently the tank class of the animal kingdom, heavy, armored, and unstoppable. In the TV show The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the character Rocksteady is one of the most famous pop culture rhinos. While his mutation varies by canon, he is traditionally depicted as a black rhinoceros, embodying the species' reputation for short-tempered aggression and brute force over intellect. Black Panther, 2018. The armored war rhinos of Wakanda offer a different view. These creatures, bred for defense and loyalty, resemble the larger white rhinoceros, specifically the northern subspecies. Here, the animal is not a monster, but a noble steed, representing African sovereignty and military might. Conversely, in art, Salvador Dali's obsessions with the rhinoceros, often based on Albrecht Dürer's famous woodcut, focused on the mathematical perfection of its horn and armored plates, viewing the beast as a cosmic, divine design. Today, the narrative for both Diceros bicornis and Ceratotherium simum has shifted from fear to tragedy. The White Rhino, particularly the northern subspecies, became a global icon of extinction with the death of Sudan, the last male, in 2018. They are no longer just mythical fire-stompers or movie monsters. They are fragile symbols of conservation, representing a prehistoric strength that is rapidly vanishing from the wild. The rhinoceros is, in its entirety, a monument to the relentless pressure of selection, a creature built on the scale of ancient terrestrial battleships, yet now reduced to a fugitive existence dictated by the absurd, fictional value of its horn. Their survival now depends not on their immense strength or thick hides, but on the delicate balance between the efficacy of armed counterpoaching units, the political will to aggressively prosecute the criminal networks that drive the trade, and the mastery of cutting-edge reproductive science that may one day use the genetic ghosts of the departed to repopulate the savanna.